Oh, let me stop sharing. Live on YouTube. That's awesome. Hey, YouTube.
Hey, YouTubers. Welcome. How are you? Be letting folks in shortly here. All right. Well, it seems like folks are beginning to trickle in. I know we have a few folks here with us on YouTube Live, so welcome. It's always great to have you. It's nice to see some familiar names and faces. Give everybody a moment here to get their audio settled. Great. So I'm sure people are going to trickle in. We're a couple minutes past the mark here, so we will get started. Nice to see everybody. Happy Friday. Hey, Eric. Nice to see you. Welcome back. Looks like everyone's settled. Welcome to another AMA session. This is our Ask Me Anything series that we do every Friday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern with a different Pragmatic Institute instructor. These are informal discussions that we hold every week where we talk all things product. So we are joined by the wonderful Paul Young. Hey, Paul, thanks for being here.
Hello, good to see everybody.
Yeah, we're excited to kind of dig in. I think we got some great questions this week, especially, a lot surrounding competitive competition and advantage. So I'm excited to dig in there. But before we do that, just wanted to direct some attention to our Pragmatic Institute annual survey. This runs up until December 18th. And we conduct this each year. It provides insights into our company happenings, different salaries that folks are making, emerging trends, and so much more that you can really take with you into 2021. And I think we'd all agree that now more than ever with these unprecedented times, it's probably very valuable. So, you can find that on our website. You can find that on all of our social channels. And then Sarah will be posting that into the chat as well. So be sure to take a couple minutes. It doesn't take long. And again, we are running that through December 18th.
Hey, Kelly, I want to plug for that survey as well, because I've run it in the past within Pragmatic, and other people are doing it now. But it's a really, really valuable tool for the community. Pragmatic doesn't make any money on the survey, right? We gather this data and we publish the results back out to the community as a service to the community, because we want everyone to get a sense of sort of like what's the state of the union for product management and marketing that's out there. And so the data is really cool. In fact, if you go to our website right now, if you go to Pragmatic Institute, you can see a decade of back instances of the survey, and all the data is there for you. And it's really interesting. I can actually drill into the data and I can say, what is the average salary and bonus for a female product manager in the state of California, with her MBA? And you can look at all that. So it's really cool for you. It's a benefit because if you are in the product world and you take the survey, you can go back later and see, well, how do I compare? How does my salary and bonus and level of education and the number of products that I manage and so on compare to the rest of the world? And also if you're hiring people, you can get a sense of, your compensation that you're offering and all those other things. And so it's just a really valuable thing that we encourage everyone to fill out. You give us a little data and then we publish it back to everybody else. It's a benefit for everybody. So if you have the opportunity, spend 5 or 10 minutes filling out the survey, definitely encourage everyone to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also have a new episode, our podcast episode of Pragmatic Live is coming out today. And that's all around our 2020 survey as well. And, Rebecca Caligeris, our VP of marketing and product, delves into, some use cases where folks who have actually been able to take this information and use it to position themselves in a place, or, basically kind of advise the resources that they need, that they really got buy-in from because of these statistics. So I agree, it's very powerful. All right, Paul, are you ready for your first question here?
Yeah, shoot, let's go for it.
All right, so this one comes from Robert, and he says, I have a solid relationship with my sales team, but they seem to think that they understand our competition better than my product team does. Many of them are seasoned vets, but should we, or when do we trust our sales team as a valid source of competitive insight?
That's a good question, Robert. Thank you for setting that one in. So I'll give you a couple of thoughts about this, and then we can, maybe talk offline if you ever want to follow up. So sales knows a lot about the competition. And so I generally trust what they have to say because they're out there in the field all the time. And they're talking to customers, they're talking to evaluators in the buying process. And so they're hearing things. Now, obviously, we have to do some validation of the things that they hear, just to make sure that they're not, offering one data point that we take to represent the full and complete truth. Sometimes sales will get kind of half truths from buyers when they're out there in the field, or they'll only hear the rosy parts and they won't hear the the bad parts, so to speak. And so look at it as yet another data point. It's not an exhaustive and complete understanding of the competition, but it's a really good starting point. And so that's the first point. Can you trust sales? Yeah, you could trust them, but they're going to only be able to tell you what they know, and what they know is what they're hearing from their clients. And so what we have to do is we have to go beyond that. So think of that as one data point that's in the whole universe of things that you would want to learn about the competition. So you're going to supplement the things you hear from sales with your own research. So that might be, things that you do on Google, and the researching you do by crawling through their websites and looking at their product demos and publicly available information. You might supplement that with information that you get from analysts. If you've got analysts that cover your space, they may be able to tell you things about the competition. You may do win-loss analysis where you're actually talking to those recent evaluators to find out why they chose you or why they chose the competition. You may also do things like surveys or validation style research. You could also do things like interviewing salespeople that you brought in from other parts of the organization. I mean, there's lots of ways you can gather competitive data, but we would advocate for a mix of a bunch of different approaches and research techniques so that you can find the most complete picture. And then the last thought I'll leave you with is when we're working with sales, regardless of whether we're talking about the competition or if we're talking about something like pricing or discounting or what materials they need, I always want to encourage product teams to look at the relationship with sales as a collaborative one. That's what we want to drive for, rather than an adversarial one. And so maybe think about sales more about like, how can we build the most trust? And what do we need to supply from the product team perspective to build trust in that direction as well? Maybe it's not, hey, sales, I don't trust you. You're not getting the complete picture from your buyers. You're only hearing the good stuff about the competition. But maybe it's, hey, sales, I know you know a lot about the competition and I'd love to get your insights so that I can use that to supplement the data that I have. And then we can go together into the market in a way that will help us win with a more complete understanding of the market. So collaboration, you attract more flies with honey than vinegar. All right. And so always try to work together with sales to the extent that you can. If you make them an adversary, they'll act that way, and it's just not super productive. So that's what I would recommend there.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Robert, hopefully that's helpful. I think, Paul, you just gave a really robust list of examples. So hopefully he can start using those, as soon as possible. And it's funny, I feel like we have a lot of competitive analysis questions here today, intelligence enablement. So we will continue with another one. This one comes from Taylor, who asks, how can my product team best work with other teams or functions to develop a holistic strategy for competitive intelligence and enablement?
That's a good question. I think it ties into the one that we just kind of touched on. And I'll get into that. But before I do that, I want to welcome Eric and Don. Welcome to the AMA. Good to see you. And Eric, I like your background there. Is that you in your own background? Yeah, that's pretty good. I like that. You're on mute. I'm sorry.
That's me in Hawaii, I think. Or is it
Hawaii?
Thank you. It's good to see you all.
Yeah, likewise. Good to see you. So as always, it's an AMA, right? Ask me anything. So if you have things that are pressing on your mind that you want to talk about, feel free to either drop them in the chat or unmute, and we're happy to talk about whatever is on your mind in the realm of product management or marketing, or if you want to talk about gardening, I like that too. All right. So how do we develop a more holistic strategy for competitive intelligence? That was the question, right? From, was it Taylor?
That's correct. Yep.
All right. So I'm going to tie into the answer I gave before to, I think it was Robert on the first question. Assembling a picture of the competition and what they're doing. Think of it like a puzzle, right? A puzzle has lots of little pieces, and you start off you're on the table with your jigsaw puzzle and you spread them all out. And you're like, wow, all these pieces, like, I know they fit together, but like, how do I assemble this complete picture? Well, it's kind of the same thing for competitive intel, right? So you've got all these pieces lying around. Some of those pieces are coming from sales. Some of them are coming from your executive team. Some of them are coming from primary research that you would do yourself. Some of them are coming from, information you might gather publicly or from analysts. And so the job of product management is not necessarily to supply every single piece of the puzzle, but it's rather to put together the pieces of the puzzle in a way that's going to assemble the greater picture. And so the way I like to think about it is when we sit down with groups like sales or groups like executives or groups like, market research, or if you have a research team, we're trying to talk about what are all the things we want to learn about the competition and who can supply the right pieces so that we can put together the full puzzle. And if you find that there are pieces that nobody has, maybe that's where we need to supplement with external research. And so I think of a cross-functional team meeting, maybe you have it for 45 minutes where you sit down on Zoom or in person, if you can do that. And you say, here are the big things we need to know about the competition. Who already knows these things? Maybe we have a lot of that in our heads already. In that case, that's great. What are the pieces we don't yet know, but we know we want to know? Let's go find those. And then we put it all together. We have our holistic strategy. We know who's going to do what. It all centralizes back in product management and marketing. We put together the picture and we publish it out for the rest of the organization so that we can do something about it. That's how I think about it.
Great. I just want to welcome Manesh. Hey, Manesh, good to see you again. I saw you pop in. And just a reminder for everybody, whether you're watching this back, watching it back or you're watching it live on YouTube, we always say, feel free to come early, leave early, come late, whatever works for your schedule. But, we always appreciate when you pop in and talk products. So feel free to post any questions you have in the chat with Paul, and we will move on in the meantime to a question from Sam, Paul. This one goes, I've just onboarded onto a brand new product team. We all come from different principles, industries, processes, and then he goes on to say Agile, Scrum, Waterfall. And I truly believe that we can make magic, but what is the key to good collaboration and flow within a very diverse product team, especially when we're all coming together for the first time? It's interesting.
That sounds like something that'd be right up my alley. I mean, that's the kind of team that I just love working with. And when I reflect back on my career as a product manager and later as a product executive, and the things that I enjoyed the most, it was, forming up those teams and getting people to work together, and then eventually seeing those people within those teams go on to greater things. One of my favorite examples was I hired a guy back. I was in charge of a product team at Dell that was doing one of their first forays into software. And I had the ability to assemble my own product team, and I hired a bunch of people, both internally and externally. One of the guys that I hired externally, I'm not going to mention his name because I don't want to embarrass him, but he went on to really great things. And he's now one of the directors of product management for PlayStation, and they just had a big launch. And so I keep getting on his butt to send me a new PlayStation, but I haven't seen it yet. So I don't know. But anyways, to answer the specific question before I go too far off on a tangent, how do we get everyone to work together? Well, all right. So you set me up for this. So I'm gonna go ahead and mention it. The Pragmatic framework is a really good device for doing that. That's actually why we invented it. We wanted to provide a device. I call it a framing device. It's a framework. It's a context to get everyone to speak the same language. And the really fun thing about the framework, at least from my perspective, is that it takes a whole diverse product team and it puts everyone on the same page. Right. So when we say business plan, this is what we mean. When we say roadmap or requirement or user story or, positioning, this is what we mean. and it gets everybody speaking that same language. Now, the cool thing about it is that you can use it with people that have 15 years of experience and somebody who's just stepping into their first product role, and they can all speak that same language. And so, I mean, without tooting our horn too much, I think that's a really good device for getting everyone to speak that same language. Beyond that, beyond just the framework, whether you use Pragmatic's framework or something else to get everyone on the same page, we need something to do that. The next step would be to make sure that we're all moving in the same direction. And that means we have a common understanding of our strategy and we're working off the same set of market data. So we at Pragmatic teach this concept that anyone who's been to our classes will immediately recognize. We call it the idea of being outside in, right? The idea that you should listen to your market before you build stuff, kind of a common sense thing. And so how are we gathering that market data? Are we all working off the same page with regard to that market data? One of the ways that I would ensure with the teams that I led that we were all incentivized in the product team to go and gather market data was I would actually put a quota on my product managers that I managed for the market data that they were supposed to gather. If you've ever come to a Pragmatic class, we call one of the market research methodologies that we use, we call it NIHITO, an acronym that stands for Nothing Important Happens in the Office. And the idea is you got to get out from behind your desk to go listen to your market, right? Well, it's not enough to do that once. You got to do that continuously. It has to happen all the time. And so I would actually put a quota on my product managers for the number of NIHITO visits that I would expect them to execute each quarter. Typically, the quota I would give my product managers was 10. So 10 NIHITO visits per product manager per quarter. And if you do the math, what that equates to is about one market interaction per product manager per week. And I think that's pretty reasonable, actually. If you're a product manager, I kind of question, how are you managing your product if you're not talking to your market at least weekly? And so what I find is that when we're using a common framework, when we're getting our product team into the market on a continuous basis and working off outside in market data, we just sort of naturally come together and rally towards a common goal. And so those are the big things I would look for to create that magic that we're looking for.
Yeah. And just to touch on this kind of falls into Jan Firestone, who has the next question here. But, I think you're the perfect person to ask because you've ran so many product management teams. But, she says, I know that PMs seldomly have the same job description across varying companies and industries. In a recent virtual networking conversation, there was talk that a product manager must be two things: strategic, aka the market expert, and tactical, aka the product expert. What other things do you think a successful product manager has? I mean, especially from your pedigree and all the success you've had, I feel like you're the perfect guy to answer this.
Oh, thank you. All right, so let's go back to the framework for that answer. And I am gonna do something here, and hopefully this will work. I'm gonna share my screen. So let's look at that. Can you all see the framework? So this will be useful to have this conversation. So most of you who are watching this AMA may be familiar with our framework already. If not, a very sort of 10-second understanding of this framework will help answer the question that Jan was asking. So what makes a product manager successful? Well, they already put it in the question. On one side, you're strategic, and on the other side, you can execute. So strategic to execution is the first thing we have to think about. And then the other side of the equation is also represented on the framework from top to bottom. A good product manager has to be business oriented. They also have to be technically oriented. And it's sort of a mix of both. So as you go top to bottom on our framework, you're going to find business oriented stuff on the top and more technically oriented stuff on the bottom. So I think of it as 4 quadrants of skill sets that a good product manager has to develop. I'm going to get on my soapbox for just a moment here. Most product managers are not product managers. They're what I call feature managers. They are really attuned to the technology, and they're really focused on the backlog, the technology, the requirements, and so on. But they're not so much on the business side of the equation. And so a lot of times what I find is that we need to ramp up the upper left-hand side of the framework and that skill set. How do we get them more business oriented, more market oriented? Because they're so attuned to the features themselves. So in terms of hard skills, business to technical, strategic to tactical, all those things are important. And then when you get into the soft skills, we could spend a whole AMA just talking about soft skills that make product managers successful. I actually wrote an article in our Pragmatic Marketer magazine about this a while back. And there's a presentation I did on the same topic called the Product Management X Factor. So if you want to learn more about this, we can maybe dig up a link and put that in the YouTube. But the idea here is that if these things that you see on the screen in our framework represent the hard skills, there's another parallel set of soft skills that makes someone successful. Because we've all seen somebody who can do a good business plan and they can gather all the data, but they still can't get investment because they can't tell an effective story and wrap it around it. So we need both hard and soft skills. When I think about the softer side of product management, I think about things like being an effective negotiator. You got to be able to negotiate all across the business. You got to be able to present well. You got to be a good public speaker. You got to be able to sell your ideas. You got to be able to influence people. The title is product manager, right? Not product dictator, right? So you can't go to people and say, do this because I'm the product manager. It doesn't work that way. So there's a lot of soft influencing skills that go along with the role. But I will tell you, Callie, the number one thing that I would hire for whenever I was hiring product managers, the number one thing I would test for in interviews, beyond just the framework and understanding of the skills and so on, curiosity. Curiosity was the number one thing I would test for, because someone who is innately curious is the kind of person who will not be able to stand sitting behind their desk and go to internal meetings all the time. They're going to innately get out from behind their desk and go talk to the market. So curious people do that. People who aren't as curious, they're fine going to internal meetings all day. So I want somebody with that curious entrepreneurial spirit. I think that lends itself really well to product management. And so I would actually test for that in interviews. I would ask them questions like, what were the last 3 things you learned? What are the last couple of books you just read? And so on, just to test, like, are they continuously learning? Are they curious? Or are they fine just sort of being stuck in a rut? I want the curious people.
Yeah, I think that's really great, because we get so many questions like week after week. It's like, how do I land that interview? How do I impress these people? How do I, when they always say like, hey, look, take a copy of our framework and put it over their desk. But I think that that's a really good insight too. It's like, how are you continually learning? What are the curiosity is certainly something that I think, to your point, you've led product teams for a long time. So that's great to know. I'm sure that our audience can take that away.
Oh, it looks like Norm put a link to the Rockstar X Factor presentation into the Zoom chat. So thank you, Norm, for doing that. Thank you, NDub.
That's great. And we had touched on this a little earlier, just, about the survey as a whole and everything. But Ronald, I think, is asking what we're all wondering. And he says, curious what your thoughts are on the future of product and what it'll look like for us PMs and PMMs in the new year of 2021. Do you think more of the same, different opportunities, or do you think that we will finally go back to a normalcy, if there is such a thing?
I mean, great question. And that's the $1 million question, right? What is the future going to hold? If I knew that, I would be retired on an island somewhere if I knew what the future held. But I mean, I'll give you my thoughts, but, take them for what they're worth, right? Hold 2 cents. So we are going to get back to something that will look a little bit more like normal in 2021, but we're never going to go back to what it was in 2018 or 2019. There will be a new normal that will set in. Like, for example, this new normalization of meeting over Zoom is going to be a lot more prevalent than it ever was. So like video meetings, going into the office and so on, going to the office is going to be more of an exception than a rule. There are some firms based on, your culture and so on that really want to incentivize in-person work. Like, it wouldn't surprise me that Apple, is going to try to get people back in person because that's their culture. But many other organizations have said, you know what, we're going to dramatically downsize our, physical footprint. And, there'll be a small office where people can come in if they need to collaborate in person, but a lot of this stuff's going to happen remotely from here on out. Makes a lot of sense from a business standpoint. It's a lot less expensive to do Zoom than it is to pay for, expensive office space downtown. And so I think you're going to see a lot more of that. Physical office spaces will downsize. Now, in terms of product management's going to have to adapt to this new normal. So things like Nihito visits are going to be a lot different when everybody's doing remote work. And so how do you do Nihito when things are all over Zoom? Well, some of that's okay. Some of that's actually good. I can do things over Zoom that I can't do in person, at least not as easily. Like, for example, if I'm doing a market research with Eric, I could ask him to share his screen and I could actually record what he's doing. A lot harder to do that in person. And so some of those things are actually benefits, but we're going to have to really think about how we adapt to that. And I think there are things that will come up that we don't even expect yet. There's definitely going to be some opportunity in 2021 as we get back to new normal and the economy starts to like ramp up again, hopefully. Then there may be an appetite for more investment to capitalize on that. So you may be able to take that idea you've been sitting on for the last year that you just couldn't do because of COVID, and then go get investment for your business to make it happen, to grab all that new business that's re-entering. That wouldn't surprise me. But I think the number one thing is just flexibility and being able to roll with it. All right. People who are too rigid and talk about, oh, I wish things were the way they used to be. There's no place for that anymore. We just got to go with it. Things are going to be different. Deal with it. Pretty simple.
Right. Yeah, and then hopefully that's why I'm just so excited about the survey this year, because I just think it's going to be just so interesting what it uncovers, especially in unprecedented times that no one really expected, that we've all been made to adhere to. So that's certainly interesting. And welcome to the folks who just hopped on. Happy to have you. Just a reminder, we have Paul for about another 15 minutes. So feel free to pop any questions that you have in the chat. You can send them to me personally. You can send them to the group, but we're certainly want to hear from you. So here's another one about competitors, Paul. This one comes from Desiree, and she says, what are some popular tools or strategies that my company can use to monitor our competitors more closely?
Okay, well, I don't necessarily know about new, but there's certainly some that are underutilized. There are a bunch. So like, first of all, do the simple blocking and tackling stuff, right? Go to Google, set up a Google alert for your competitor, and you'll get a digest, once a day, once a week on anything that's new for them. Right. That the cost for doing that is like $0 in terms of dollars and 5 minutes in terms of your time. And it will, dramatically reduce it'll just give you an automated digest. All right. That's pretty simple. Second, there are tools like, there's an organization. Let me actually pull them up on, see if they're still out there. There's a company that we used to use called CI Radar. I think they might be called Q Radar now, but CI Radar. They're still, so if you go to ciradar.com, you can read about them. They're one example. There's a bunch of others. Let me pull this over so we can see it. So CI Radar does competitive intelligence gathering for you. We have no affiliation with them other than, I've used them in the past. But they think of that as like a Google Alerts on steroids, and it's going to kind of go out and, gather stuff for you so that you can focus on analyzing it instead of gathering it. So we want to use tools like that to see what's out there. Beyond that, this may be the year, especially if you're in business to business, to start going a little bit deeper on the competition, because the competition has changed a lot during the time of COVID. They may have gotten more flexible with their pricing, or they may have gotten more flexible in what they're going to say yes to in terms of customization. And sometimes those things don't show up on the website. It's really hard to find competitive pricing or customization on your competitor website. So there are ways to find that. Win-loss analysis is probably the best one. And so if you don't have a win-loss analysis program in place at your organization, 2021 is the year you want to start it, right? Start it in Q1. And please don't forget about wins. Everyone focuses on the losses. The wins are just as good. In fact, sometimes they're better. I have a good product management consultant friend here in Austin, a guy named Will Scott, who's he does outsource competitive intelligence. And he has a company called SteelPoint that does competitive intel. And he uses this analogy that he's a big tennis player. If he were to win a contest to hit tennis balls with Roger Federer, who's one of the best tennis players in the world, what if he did that for 15 minutes and somehow in that 15 minutes, he was able to win a point against Roger Federer? Well, at the end of that 15 minutes, if he goes up to the net and shakes Roger's hand and says, great, that was awesome, thank you so much, and then leaves, what a missed opportunity, right? Wouldn't it be better to say, hey, Roger, that 1 point that I managed to win off you, how did I do that? Because remember, your win is their loss. So wins are awesome. I always want to start with win analyses. And the other cool thing about win analysis, no one is ever opposed to it. There is zero internal friction to starting a win analysis program because wins are happy. right? We get to celebrate our success and so on, figure out how to replicate it. So you also learn a lot from the competition or about the competition. If they chose to go with you over the competitor, your win is their loss. Why did they choose you? Wouldn't it be nice to know that? And so win analysis is a great place to go. And then one other source that I don't see people using a ton is Secret Shopper. So there are organizations out there that it might put you in an ethical bind to do, to call up your competitor and try to get pricing information or so on. Well, there are consultants out there that will do that for you, right? So that it's not you doing that, direct. And it's called Secret Shopper. If you go on Google, you can find lots and lots of different options for that. But if you want to find out, like, what does their pricing look like? What does their configuration options look like, and so on, in B2B especially, Secret Shopper is one way to do that. You have to pay for it. It's not free. But you can get some good data on there that you might not be able to get yourself. So a couple different options to think about.
And I love your visual examples, because I'm such a visual learner. So when we're talking about the puzzle pieces, when you're bringing up the framework, when we're talking about that tennis match, it's just so helpful to really nail it home. So I love a good visual example. In the meantime, we have here's a question from Mara Jones, Paul. This one says, I find that in my company, we're constantly being pushed to launch and mature as soon as possible. My question is it really the goal to push as soon as possible, or how long do you think each phase should take when appropriately resourced? That's kind of the loaded question there.
Yeah. So, I mean, Mara, bravo on asking like the broadest question ever. So that's a really big question, right? How long should it take to bring a product to market? It should take, 12.7 weeks. I mean, I don't know. So the answer is, I don't know. It really does depend, and while I hate giving the answer, it depends, because I feel like it's kind of a cop-out answer. I don't think there's any other answer I can give in this case other than it depends, because it does depend. Are you in B2B or B2C? Are you in a startup? Are you in a large enterprise? Are you working on the first product in your portfolio or the 18th product in your portfolio? How mature is your product team and your development team? Have they done things like this before? Are you doing agile or waterfall? I mean, there's so many questions I'd want to know in addition to what she'd asked. So let me just say, let me sort of rephrase the question a little bit into something I think I can answer, which is, how do we make the trade-off decision between speed, quality, and resourcing? Your plan will be driven by one of three things. All right. It'll be driven by the date, right? We got to hit this date. It'll be driven by the scope. In other words, I have to ship with this scope, or it'll be driven by your resourcing model, right? One of those three things will drive the plan. And so the question is always, if push comes to shove, which of those three things are you going to change? Are you going to change your date? Are you going to slip the date? Are you going to cut scope in order to hit that date? Or are you going to double the size of your development team to make things happen on time? Now, usually for most product managers or product teams, it's not the last one, right? Because you can't double the resourcing of your engineering team. And even if you could, most engineering managers would tell you it won't matter. Because by the time I go out there and recruit and hire and train new engineers, this project is over. So you might affect the next project, but not this one. So usually it's going to be one of the first two. Are we going to cut scope, or are we going to change the date? And so I always encourage teams to have that conversation at the very beginning of the project in what I call the chartering phase. So like, for example, if I'm sitting down with Manesh or Don, I might say, okay, we're just kicking off this project, but let's give a hypothetical. Let's say it's a couple of weeks before we're supposed to launch, and we just now realized that we're not going to hit our date with the scope that we had hoped. What are we going to do? Are we going to cut the scope to hit the date, or are we going to slip the date and ship it when it's ready? I want to have that conversation when we're calm at the very beginning of the project, not when we're going crazy at the end. Because when we're calm, we can have those trade-off discussions with a much clearer head. So I always want to have a clear eyes when I'm going through that conversation.
Yeah, and just for my own curiosity, because this kind of falls into what Jan had said, like, look, I know it's different between varying companies and varying industries, but when she says appropriately resourced, I mean, is there a rule of thumb there? Like, what do you think that, appropriate resourced would look like, for success?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, are we at a startup or a large enterprise? If you're at a startup, appropriately resourced might be like the founder and the CTO, right? I mean, we always want more resources, right? We always want more resources. But I think the question is, within the confines of the resourcing you're able to get from the business, what are you able to achieve and at what time? How can we make the trade-offs there? And so we get the resources in the business planning process. So that's upstream. That happens way up here. Once you get your resources, you can't really go back and negotiate to double the size of your team once the resourcing decision has been made. At least that's atypical. So now that we have this pool of resources, whatever it is, now we have to decide what's our trade-off between scope and time. Now, Agile helps us with that to an extent because we can cycle, iterate, pivot, and so on. But it's not a panacea. So, we need to constantly be making that scope time trade-off, regardless of the size of our resourcing pool. Oh, and Callie, one other thing.
Yeah, no, please, Paul, go ahead.
Sometimes people refer to those three things, time, scope, and resourcing, as like the three-legged stool, or the iron triangle, the idea that you can pick any two. But there are some organizations where they fix all three. They say, Gwari, did I say your name right, Gwari? They would say, you must hit this date. You must hit this date with this scope. And you must hit the date and scope within the confines of our current resourcing model. So you have to hit all three, and you can't change any of them. So if I fix all three of those things, if I fix time, scope, and resourcing, there's actually a fourth thing that starts to suffer. And sometimes not everyone's aware of this, so I always like to touch on this. The fourth thing that suffers is quality. Quality is what suffers when we fix time, scope, and resourcing. Now, in some companies, that's okay. Like many people refer to, have you ever heard Facebook's mantra of move fast and break things? I mean, the idea here is that we're okay breaking something if we're first to market, if we're getting there fast, and we'll just go clean it up later. And you might convince me that that's cool, and that's okay. If you're building a B2C social networking app, you're going to have a little bit harder of a time convincing me that slipping on quality is acceptable if you're building a pacemaker or an insulin pump or a ventilator, or something that's mission critical. But ultimately, this is a decision that only you can make because everyone knows their company and their culture and what kind of products they're working on. But just be aware that if I fix those three things, quality is what slips.
I was going to say, Mara, feel free to write in and clarify. I know you were on the call today, but, I think that Paul gave you some great insights, but, again, is it a startup? Is it an enterprise? Is it agile? Is it waterfall? I think, feel free to write in and kind of some of those specifics. We can kind of lead you, a little bit better. So again, folks, we have about 5 minutes left with Paul. If anybody has any questions, feel free to chime in, put them in the chat. You can send them to me directly. Here comes one from Mackenzie, Paul. She says, I was wondering if there was a way that we can evaluate full funnel market share in each state that we've launched our product in. In parentheses, it's an e-learning product. I'm an aspiring PM, and it's a question that my company has that I want to offer insight on if I can. Any advice or programs that might be able to help?
Yes.
And she has that curiosity. She's an aspiring PM. So,
yeah.
Probably
so
someone.
I like the curiosity. So the answer is yes, but I'm assuming she wants more than that. So yes, there are programs that you can do, but she might not like the answer, Mackenzie, because so the question was, I have an e-learning product. We are launching it into multiple states, and I want to find the market share and funnel analytics per state.
Correct.
Okay. So this is going to require a level of market research that most likely is going to require spending some money. Because when we're trying to determine market share by state, we're going to have to do a couple of things. Mostly we're going to have to do some surveys, and we're going to have to do some market research studies within each state. So I might have to go to Texas or Indiana or California, and I'm going to have to run a survey across a representative sample of my market in each state to find out what is my penetration. In marketing, we sometimes do awareness studies as well to find out how much people have awareness of our solution, either aided or unaided, and so on. but we're going to have to do probably a survey. We might have to do up to 50 surveys if we're trying to cover all 50 states. That might get a little expensive. So maybe instead of going into all states, we just target one, maybe a smaller one that doesn't have like let's start with like Delaware or Rhode Island, and if you're in an e-learning type product, educational product, let's say you're focusing on K through 12. If I went to Delaware or Rhode Island, instead of having like Texas where I live, where there are, 10,000 school districts across the state. Well, maybe if I'm in Rhode Island or Delaware, there's only 100 across the state. It's a lot easier to get a representative sample of 100 than it is of 10,000. And it's a lot less expensive as well. So maybe I can start in one of those smaller states. I can run a survey to figure out what's their awareness of my solution. Are they using my solution? And then I can figure out how that compares to the overall population to get a market share. So that would probably be my starting point if I were to try to figure that out.
And then just a follow-up question for Mackenzie, but I love, we talk about this curiosity. We talk about that she's an aspiring PM. I mean, what other things do you think that she can do to sort of impress her leadership, right? She wanted to dig in and ask us this so she could bring back some tangible, results or data. What else can she do?
Yeah, great. I mean, it depends on her role today, but, I have never had a product manager turn somebody down who wanted to go out into the field with them and perform Nihito or market research. So that's a really good starting point. Like, how can you get some market data? I love market data. I don't care where it comes from. And so if she wants to impress me as the product executive, go get some market data that I haven't seen before. That would be amazing. And it also shows your curiosity. Maybe do some win-loss analysis, or maybe go help with sales on the product marketing side. Product marketing is always under-resourced. They could use a lot of help. So can you pitch in one of those projects? Can you do some competitive analysis? There is never a shortage of work when it comes to product management and marketing. So look at the framework, pick a box and dive into it, right? This is not rocket surgery, but show your curiosity and just find out an area where you can contribute. Go talk to your product executive and see what they need help with. Offer to pitch in. They're not going to say no. They might say, well, how can you contribute in this area? But then you can say, well, I learned XYZ at Pragmatic and I'm willing to help. Great starting point.
And here's one last one that I'll give you, Paul. And this is, we've had a couple questions surrounding this, but ways to keep customers and buyers engaged, right? I mean, no longer can we do those in-person lunches or we can do those happy hours. So a lot of them have been sort of more virtual. They've heard of things like cheese tastings and wine, but are there many like some other interesting concepts or maybe ways that you continue to connect or that you think that folks can utilize?
Sure. I mean, there's no one right answer to this. It's about like this sort of menagerie of different options that we might choose from in order to engage with our market. Here's an idea. How about you run an AMA where once a week you get your market together to talk to you and you can hear their questions, right? That might be something you could do, and it'd be online. The cost of doing that is relatively low, just costs you a little bit of your time, but it provides you a great venue to connect with your market and see what their hot spots are. We do that all the time. Obviously, you're on it now, but we're getting questions, and that's a form of market research and a connection with them. It also, hopefully illustrates that we're trying to be responsive to our market during COVID and provide a venue to connect with us. Like, we want to have an ongoing relationship. That's one way to illustrate it, some sort of AMA or office hours type series. We've also done versions of this that are like executive forums or breakfasts where we get together with a team, either in person or online, on a monthly or a quarterly basis, almost like a birds of a feather type session, where it's not so much Pragmatic teaching people, but rather executives and product managers having the chance to connect with one another. That's really valuable. And our Pragmatic community, I think, is another example of a way to do this. We established this new community forum where Pragmatic alumni can go back and connect with one another, and they can talk to each other about how they're implementing some of these ideas and so on. So you could implement your own community of your customers so that they have a chance to connect with each other and talk about what's working. And then you can kind of be a fly on the wall and see what's happening within the community, what are the hot spots and so on. It's just another good way to keep them talking both with you and with each other, and show that connection is live and real.
I think that's great. And you made a terrific point, and it just made me think of our product leadership council, right? These are meetings that we hold once a month that, you do have to apply to be a part of it, but, it's really enriching conversations. It's the people that are in it every day that are really kind of, exchanging insightful techniques and tools and things along those lines. So I think that's some great examples. But we have hit our time, Paul. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. We appreciate you lending us your brain for 45 minutes and having these discussions. We do want to remind folks that we are here each and every Friday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. We encourage you to pop in with your questions. You can send them beforehand. You can, post them in the chat, but it's important that we are here to kind of talk products. So, and just a reminder to everybody that, we do have our upcoming product chats. And everybody who trains with us now moving forward does get a PAC membership. So this is very exciting. We have a huge library of curated resources, peer-to-peer engagements, events, and a concierge level team that's like solely dedicated to your success. So I'm excited to see how that grows. And we're award winning now. They just won a bunch of awards, most recently the Higher Logic Award. So can't say enough about that team. It's fantastic. But until then, stay healthy. Have a great weekend. And Paul, thanks again.
All right. Anytime. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll talk soon.